Today we're talking about fight scenes. Dylan, cue the intro. What's up? Welcome to my channel. My name is Alyssa. I'm a writer, editor, full-time 9-to-5 employee, and I currently own my own publishing company called Kingdom Books. And here on this channel, I talk about mindset tips, habit tips, writing tips to help you become a successful entrepreneur. So if that sounds interesting to you, go ahead and consider subscribing. Today, we are talking about fight scenes, specifically the structure of a fight scene as described in this book, Writing Fight Scenes by Rayne Hall. I wasn't planning on talking about fight scenes today, but as some of you may know, I am currently in the middle of my beta reader process for my novel. And before I send out my chapters to my beta readers, I always read over the sections and do any last minute edits. I am very glad I did that this week because come to be chapter 17, past Alyssa decided it was a good idea to just leave a whole part of that chapter out for future Alyssa to deal with at a later time. And that later time happened to be last night around 8 p.m., several hours after I should have sent my email out to my beta readers. And I had to write a fight scene. And fight scenes are not the easiest thing for me to write. Something about them, my brain has a hard time envisioning it, so I have a hard time getting it down on paper. So I'm so glad I had this book because this has a whole 6-part structure that really helps me outline the scene, and I got something down. I sent out my beta reader chapters before midnight, barely. Or maybe it wasn't. No, I finished editing them before midnight, but I didn't send them out till after midnight. I'm so sorry to my beta readers if you're watching this. I really do apologize. But yeah, since this was so helpful for me, I thought I'd share it with you in case you have trouble writing fight scenes too. Without further ado, here is the 6-part structure for writing fight scenes according to Rayne Hall. The first part of the structure, part number 1, is suspense. This is the build-up to the fight. It not only gets your characters ready for the fight, but it gets you ready for the fight as a reader. During this part of the structure, you want to give your readers information on the terrain, what kind of fight this is going to be. Is it going to be hand-to-hand? Is the person planning on using a weapon? What's the weather like? There's also, if it's an entertaining type of fight scene, traditionally there will be some banter or dialogue involved that just builds up to the fight and gets the reader, it signals the reader like, oh, this is about to go down. And you want to have that because if people just start fighting out of nowhere, then, your reader could get real confused. So part 1 is to build up the suspense. Part 2 is to actually start the fight. And this includes a lot more than just throwing the first punch or shooting the first gun or whatever it is, but not a whole lot more. So this is when the characters will get into their fighting stances. Normally there will be some sizing up of the other person or people that they are fighting, and it can also have some dialogue. The dialogue could continue into this part as well. So it's a natural flow from the suspense where you have this build-up, you know the fight is coming, and now the characters are ready for it. They just haven't actually started yet. They're about to. Step 3, part 3, is the action. This is where I always get really stuck with fight scenes because I have a hard time envisioning the overall. I either get very vague in my mind with my fights or it's very specific. And the action part, you don't actually want to describe the blow-by-blow, play-by-play fight because that's just not fun to read. People don't need to know about the individual punches. People don't need to know about the specific types of kicks. Even if you know all those things, it's not what people want to read most of the time unless you're really into that kind of stuff. So in this part of the action section, you really want to focus more on the overall direction of the fight. Rayne Hall gives a really good example in here on what he means by that. It says, Sheena parried the blows with all her strength, but the enemy drove her closer and closer to the abyss. This action part doesn't last very long. It's like you don't want to draw it out. You just want to give a sense that they're fighting. And it's a good place to start using some action verbs like climb, duck, jump, swing, leap, all those things where you're not giving specifics, but you have an idea of the action that's going on. It's also a really good time to start using that terrain that you talked about in suspense creatively and get the characters interacting with their surroundings. Part 4 is the surprise. This really helped me moving on because when I do write fight scenes, I tend to kind of get stuck in the action phase, which is already hard for me to write. The surprise part really helped move things along. This is something that happens to the fight that is outside of the character's control. So that could be a sudden change in the setting. Maybe there's a sudden downpour that makes fighting a little bit harder. It could be something with a weapon. Maybe a weapon gets knocked out of someone's hand. Maybe something gets snapped in two. Or it could even have to do with people where some innocent bystander gets involved, or maybe reinforcements come in. It is something unexpected that the character cannot control. The surprise should never end the fight. It's supposed to be a trigger that kind of keeps the reader's action and gets the fight going in a different direction. But it shouldn't be the end. One of the interesting things that Rayne talks about too is the difference between gritty and entertaining fight scenes. I'm mostly giving the tips for the entertaining fight scenes because that's what I write. But he said that typically in a gritty sort of fight scene, you don't need the surprise to be such a huge element, but in an entertaining fight scene, it really helps engage the reader's interest. So evaluate what type of fight scene you have, and if you have an entertaining fight scene, highly suggest using surprises. The 5th part of the fight is the climax. This is when the fighting is at its most intense. Both of the characters are very tired, they're getting winded, they're out of breath, they don't know if they can keep going, and then suddenly somehow the main character finds the strength from within to push forward and keep going. This often takes place in the terrain's most weirdest or most dangerous area. Like maybe they're on a rope bridge and then suddenly things get very precarious. And this part of the fight, this is when you can start talking about the technically correct moves. And you can start talking about the specific blows, because people need to be able to envision the finishing of the fight. They don't need to know the whole play-by-play for the whole thing, but in the climax, they need to know what's happening, especially that last stroke that kind of finishes everything off. And the last part, part 6 of fight structure, is the aftermath. This is when the fight is over, the main character is kind of taking stock of what's happening, they're figuring out how wounded they are, they are maybe looking at the body of their dead friend next to them, they're maybe looking at the body of the dead person they just killed. They're, assessing injuries. Do they need to go to the hospital? Do they need medical attention? Are they going to be just fine? Is there anything I need to band-aid? And you want to talk about the emotional part of it as well. How are they coping with this emotionally? Do they feel nauseated, or they have a huge adrenaline rush? What's going on internally when things start calming down and they're not in that life or death mode anymore? Rayne Hall says that this is also a really good time to start using senses of smell and sight. So that for the first time, since they're not in the fight, they can actually take stock of what's around them. And the senses kind of just become much more enhanced because your heart is pounding so hard and you are coming off of that adrenaline high. So that is a 6-part structure. What I did is I literally, in the scene I was writing, I had basically written the suspense and the start part of it already, but I hadn't done any of the action, surprise, climax, any of that. So I did those as headings in my draft, and then I wrote my scene out underneath all of them, and it worked really, really well. I was able to write a fight scene that I felt like was actually halfway decent, and I know it will be revised, but it's there and it's in existence, and I didn't hate writing it. So highly suggest using the 6-part structure if that's something you struggle with. And I highly recommend this book as well, because in addition to giving all the detail on how to structure a fight, this also goes into how to fight with different sorts of elements. So it goes on to like fighting in land versus sea with weapons versus hand to hand, even different types of weapons like spears versus swords versus guns, that sort of thing. And how animals fight, how to fight with magic, and the psychological things that go on between male and female fighters and how they respond differently to certain stimuli, and within certain genres specifically. So it's not a thick book, but it is very content heavy and has a lot of very useful information. One of the things that also helped me a lot in writing this fight scene is that this was a strictly elemental fight scenes. My characters were doing a test basically where they were trying to show the like raw potential of their elemental power, and one has fire, one has water, and I was getting really stuck on how they were to fight using those elements. So I just went onto YouTube and like looked up a bunch of The Last Airbender Avatar videos and kind of wrote down some like specific moves like water spikes or fire shield, like those sorts of things. So highly recommend watching fights on YouTube as well if you're a little bit stuck on how to describe what's going on, or if you need more of a visual stimulus to kind of get your fight going. So those are my tips for writing fight scenes based on this book and based on YouTube. It was very, very helpful. I am so glad I bought this book like 2 or 3 years ago, whatever it was. I've read through it, but I haven't used it so tangibly till the other day. So yeah, if you have any tips for fight scenes, let me know down in the comments. I would love to build my knowledge base of how to do this. I know it's only gonna get better from here. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up, and if you would like to receive weekly videos on the proper habits, mindsets, strategies, tips, all those things on becoming a successful authorpreneur, go ahead and subscribe. Videos go up every Wednesday. Thank you so much for watching this video, and until next time, bye!